So, Nikki, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure. Could you kick us off and tell us a little bit about your background and what you do today?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I'm from Australia. I currently live in Newcastle. Right now, I'm in Sydney on a holiday with my family over Christmas, but I'm from Newcastle, which is a couple of hours from Sydney. And I am studying at the University of Newcastle. And I'm doing currently a degree in dietetics and a degree in biomedicine, and
Wow.
absolutely loving it.
Mm.
I came into it a few years ago with the dietetics, you know, wanting to just get back into the health field because when I came out of, excuse me, sorry, I've lost my screen.
You're good. You're
Oh,
good.
where are we? There we go. Sorry, guys. Um, yeah, I studied nutrition when I came out of high school a long time ago now, probably longer than I'd like to admit. And after having children, I unfortunately wasn't able to use any of the the course that I had completed. So
Mm.
then I decided I'd go back and learn a lot more, as much as I could, about everything in nutrition. And at this point, I feel like the nutrition space has evolved a lot since when
Mm.
I finished the original one. So for me, doing a dietetics degree seemed more valuable at this point. But having said that, what's interesting is by that point, I'd already done about 6 months of a ketogenic or carnivore diet or carnivore-ish diet. And
Mm.
so I knew it would be an interesting process going through a very dogmatic, standard dietetics
Mm.
course. And it has been as difficult as I assumed it would be. And that's why I decided that I'd also add on there a biomedicine degree, because it's the biochemistry that really gets me.
Mm.
That's the part I'm interested in.
So that's interesting that you should mention because you did your nutrition course before, and now you're going back to that, having had experience with the carnivore diet and a keto diet, which is so counter nutrition culture. So
Very.
what have you noticed are the main issues you've come up against with the mindset that you have now?
Well, it was interesting with the nutrition that I'd done. So the nutrition that I did back after finishing high school was very, very much, a plant-based narrative. It was nutrition, and I wanted to do naturopathy, but I ended up moving across to nutrition. So it was very, very plant orientated. And then I continued on with that idea right up until my early 30s after having my kids. And it was then that I was introduced to, the carnivore and the keto diet. And so, yeah, as I said, it was by that point I'd already seen such success, and I remember thinking I want to understand why I have seen so much success, and of course I want to now figure out how I can help other people
Mm.
get the same sort of success, because all throughout my life I've really honed in on a very plant-based approach, and as I said, going to school and studying a plant-based nutrition approach like naturopathy and nutrition is, it was just so counterintuitive for me to see that an animal-based diet was able to heal so many things. So I really wanted to understand why, and I wanted to understand how I could help other people to get to this, because I can see just how plant-based the nutrition world
Mm.
is.
It's crazy.
Even the medicine world is so plant-based. So I wanted to understand what's going on, and then I knew going into it that a becoming a dietitian would give me the name that I want. But I knew at that point that dietetics is very, I don't want to use the word old school, but it is. It's
Mm.
quite old school thinking. And I knew that at that point. So I thought I'll go into it and hopefully learn as much as I can about the human body, and how we, use fuels and things like that. But it's now that I'm realizing that the dietetics degree really is the name I want, but the biomedicine degree
Mm.
is what will give me what I need, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, what's the difference between sort of dietetics and like a regular nutrition course, nutrition degree?
Um, it's longer, um, probably more. Um, I think the problem I have is that with nutrition, when I studied it back after school, becoming a nutritionist was quite a, you know, it was a relatively big deal, and you could work in a clinic and be recognized as a nutritionist. And whereas now I think what's changed is that, and you could still do the same degree and become a nutritionist and put something like 3 years worth of work into it, but you can also become a health coach within 2 or 3 months, and then people can call themselves then a nutritionist or a nutrition coach, and I think that gets confused. A dietitian, it's 4 years without honors, and then you can obviously go and do the extra year, so it ends up being more like 5 years. So it's a slightly longer course, but also I feel like there is still quite a difference, hopefully, to people between a health coach and a dietitian. And I think, unfortunately, for nutritionists, they can tend to fall within that space, and that can be a little bit cloudy. That was the problem I had with it.
100%. I think that's the same, that like we've seen this massive emergence of like health coaches now, and like pretty much anyone can call themselves a health coach or a coach of some kind, you know, a business coach, a health coach, a relationship coach. And it doesn't really mean anything, but it's very difficult for someone who doesn't have experience in health and fitness and nutrition to understand the difference between a health coach, a nutrition coach, someone like a dietitian, you know, and all of these different areas in between. So no, it's a cloudy.
It's a cloudy area. A dietitian can also, I don't know what you call it in other countries, but a dietitian can also claim, patients can claim for Medicare and health related costs and things like that, which is also you know, very useful for me. I also like the idea that a dietitian can work within a hospital space, you know, so you can work with people with type 2 diabetes and you know, real issues like that. So working within a clinic space with doctors appealed to me as well, because I can see that that is a space that really needs work. Whereas unfortunately, I don't believe a nutritionist patients can claim back. Things like that are quite different.
And you mentioned that some of these dogmas that are going in your dietetics course, what particular dogmas are you referring to there? Apart from sort of, if you say plant-based, like why do you think plant-based is a dogma rather than an actual good nutritional pointer?
Well, so for example, the concepts around cholesterol and saturated fats are all still very ingrained. The whole making sure that people follow the food pyramid and making sure that people are consuming 5 serves of, you know, 5 to 6 serves of fruit and veg every day, and making sure that they're eating whole grain cereals several times a day. That's all very much still embedded in the teaching. And what I find dogmatic is and frustrating at times is that there have been a few. I'm not somebody who likes to stir the pot too much. I like to just sit in the background and take it all in. But I certainly have found it difficult to not put my hand up a few times in class at the end of a lecture and just say, but wasn't there a study that I can't quote one right off the top of my head,
I
but
bet they hate
you know, wasn't there
that.
a study? Oh my God, even in the you know, the exercise physiology courses and things like that, where you put your hand up and say, so what would you know, we're learning about how many carbohydrates an athlete might need per day, and of course it's an extortionate amount. And then for myself to come into, I'll give you a good example. We did recently, or last year, we did, you know, the Wingate tests and all those sort of things. And of course, at this point, I'm not eating any carbohydrates at all. The only carbohydrates I get are from traces in organ meats. And, you know, I was able to complete all those tests exactly the same, if not better, than my classmates who are all eating very high carbohydrate diets. And so I didn't claim that, I didn't say to them, look, this is the diet I'm doing, but I did say to the teacher, you know, what would you expect the difference would be for somebody, for example, on a zero carb or a low carb diet, like a ketogenic diet? Would they be able to complete these tests with a bit of a cheeky look on my face? And they said, oh, well, we wouldn't test that because that's not good for your body. And so we don't test that, move on. And so with all the times that I have brought up something like that, it's always very much, well, we wouldn't do that because it's bad for our body. So move on. So yeah, it's unfortunate.
It's difficult. It's difficult to get around that. And I suppose at that point, in the education system, you're only going to get resistance from that because you're challenging a whole thought process and a whole dogma. So it's very hard to undo it while you're in there. I think the best you could probably do is just like get through it. And then, you know, once you're on the other side, you can start saying all this other stuff, because, you know, it's very difficult to change it while you're in the system.
Yeah, and without, I mean, I know that I shouldn't say this, but I unfortunately if you set yourself up as being the annoying student that's always trying to stir the pot, I think it probably could affect your grades. And for myself at the moment, one rule I have been following, which is quite interesting, is when it comes to my dietetics and nutrition courses, if I just basically say the opposite of what I have come to understand in my own research, I end up getting pretty good marks. So
What
I
a
just keep
mad
going with
world.
that. Yeah, exactly. So
Wow.
interesting.
Wow. Okay, that's that's interesting one. And let's just get back a little bit to the science, really, because one of the areas that we hear a lot in, and I want to go into some of the areas about plant toxins and autoimmune disorders, but you did a great video today, and I suggest that anyone who's listening now, they go and check out Nikki's Instagram page, because she does these amazing explainer videos, which are really, really cool, and like just really clearly, methodically lays out different topics. And I'm sure she does it all in one take anyway. So that's
Totally.
impressive in itself. But one that you did today about sodium, I'd really like to talk a little bit more about, because everyone demonizes sodium. So can you tell us a little bit about what sodium is for in the body and why I guess we shouldn't fear it?
Yeah, and we do have many different electrolytes, but sodium is definitely the most, I would say, not the most important, but we have a lot of sodium abundance in the body, and it does do a lot of things. And pretty much what sodium does, the other electrolytes sort of pretty much follow on. So sodium is the main one. Sodium is people don't quite realize this, but we need sodium and potassium and calcium to create electrical impulses in the body. And if you think about all the things that we need electrical impulses for, you know, communication between neurons, and therefore moving our muscles, you know, thinking, every movement that we do in the body requires sodium to make that electrical impulse occur. So that's, to me, that's a big one in itself. I mean, what's also interesting about sodium and other electrolytes is that water will follow them in the body. And so therefore, it's very important for maintaining fluid volume. And in fact, blood pressure is very, very heavily tied to sodium, and interestingly, insulin as well. But so we need sodium coming in and out of cells in order to maintain or increase or decrease our blood volume. It's also very important as well for bringing nutrients in and out of the kidney, and of course, right at the end of the kidney, when we're making a urine, we need to decide what's coming back in and what's going out, what's going to be flushed out. You know, even recycling things like insulin is, you know, that's all occurring in the kidney. And what's so amazing about sodium is basically the body will set it up where it's deliberately trying to push sodium out of cells so that it can follow back down its concentration gradient. And with it comes the you know, the molecules like glucose and amino acids and fatty acids. So it's a very important electrolyte, and I think it's so sad. I mean, over Christmas, this is what made me think to do another little talk on sodium, because you're surrounded by people of my parents' generation that are so fearful of salt, and really it's such a shame, because if you think about all the things like that sodium is used for, you can understand why, especially people might be feeling lightheaded or low energy or muscle cramps when they're low in sodium. And I would assume that majority of the people in our parents' space probably are deficient in sodium.
And could it be, is it toxic at some level? Or is it, or does the body just take in what it needs and you excrete the rest? What's like, where has this the crazy fear of sodium come from?
Well, in my opinion, you can't have toxic amounts of sodium unless you have some kind of genetic deficiency in some kind of enzyme or some kind of genetic issue. No, because the body is very, very, very smart. I mean, the kidney, I have to say, we all understand how amazing the liver is, and you know that every organ has its purpose. But I have to say, my favorite organ so far is the kidney. It is extremely smart. It knows how much we need of everything, and if you are overdoing something like sodium, it will excrete it. If you are under eating sodium, this is the interesting thing about sodium, is that people will deliberately not eat too much salt, but the kidney is very good at recognizing, oh, we're not eating enough, so let's just absorb more, let's just bring more back in from you know, from what we originally would have excreted. So the one thing I would say is that if you have just started a low carbohydrate diet, there is a transition period where you will excrete more sodium and therefore more water, because water follows sodium, because your body has not upregulated things it needs, like transporters, in order to reabsorb sodium. So there might be a transition period, but once you have adapted, and it takes usually pretty much as long as fat adaptation takes, your body knows how much sodium it needs and how much it doesn't need, so it will excrete any excess.
So, and do we need to be having sodium in the same sort of proportions that we're having these other electrolytes? So in order, like the other electrolytes you mentioned, like potassium, and what are the full spectrum of electrolytes?
To be perfectly honest, off the top of my head, I can't think of the exact amounts per day of what you need for each, but I know that if you follow sodium with your electrolyte supplements, you will pretty much be getting what you need with the other ones. Because ideally, what I would suggest to anybody is get yourself a really good quality. I like Celtic sea salt. I think that's the best, just the way that they extract it. They have a really nice mineral profile. You shouldn't really need to worry too much about potassium and all those other minerals. The one I would say,
is that because they're just naturally in our diet more, or
they're kind of found enough in our diet. And when you're eating enough animal foods, and you are supplementing with a really good quality salt on your food, and say in your water if you feel you need it as well, you should be getting enough of those minerals. The one I would say just be aware of is magnesium, because magnesium we originally would have got from our soil when we consuming even animal foods. Of course, by that point that you're eating the meat, they would have eaten the grass and the soil, and so we would have been getting enough magnesium. But because our water and our soil is so depleted in magnesium these days, I would assume that most people are probably slightly deficient in magnesium. I would say with magnesium anywhere between 400 to 800 milligrams a day. And it's a really cheap supplement to get, and you'd know if you're low in magnesium because you might be a bit anxious, you might be getting sort of deep soreness in your muscles, and you can't really, again, with these minerals, you can't really harm yourself by having too much, because the body will excrete what it doesn't need.
Because that's the miracle of the human body, is it's really good at getting rid of what it doesn't need. But then when I think of that, I think, well, sugar, case in point, if you have too much sugar, it doesn't really always it's really good at storing that in some form. It's really good at keeping that. And I guess because it's such a, well, maybe you can tell us about that. Why?
I would say the difference, I mean, in my opinion, we have been exposed to these minerals and have evolved to need these minerals and other nutrients for so long in our evolution that we have probably developed mechanisms to be able to sort them out. Whereas the exposure to sugar, obviously we wouldn't have been exposed to refined sugar, but sugar and fructose that you would have got from foods, I would have assumed that you'd probably only be exposed to them at very, very distinct times in the year and in very small amounts. And when that occurred, it would have been advantageous to consume a bit and, of course, store it, because it would have been around the time when you're trying to store a bit of fat over winter, trying to keep yourself warmer, and therefore, maybe food might have not been as abundant in those times of the year. So, I think sugar these days, the difference is that, yes, we are very, very good at storing it, but there is a reason we're good at storing it, is because the body needed to in order to survive, but we shouldn't be consuming the amount that we consume these days. That would be my assumption on it. Whereas the body has adapted to be able to handle the other nutrients. And when I say the other nutrients, I'm also including the fat soluble vitamins A, D, E, and K. Now they can, because they are fat soluble, they can become toxic very easily. But I also think what's interesting is the human body is also very good at knowing what it needs once we're able to filter out the crap. I think one of the amazing benefits of, for example, an animal-based diet is it brings your body back to a point where you have this amazing baseline and you can tell, what is my body actually looking for today? What do I want? When you're not exposed, or you get rid of all the crap in your house and that's confusing your brain, your body can kind of go, what do I feel like today? And I find for myself personally, now that I've done almost 3 years of this diet, my body will tell me, today I want liver. I just really want liver today, or today I want kidney, or today I don't want any organs at all. I think when it comes to those sort of vitamins and minerals, especially the fat soluble vitamins, your body does have a capacity to tell you what it needs when it needs it. I think unfortunately though, it can become very confusing and your body does not know what it needs when there is packages of crap all around you. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's like cravings, isn't it?
Yeah.
If you get hunger signals confused with cravings, for instance, something that might interfere with your hunger, with your appropriate cravings, might be having had a huge sugar hit in the morning, which gives you a big insulin spike and then a big insulin crash, and all your body wants to do is soothe that insulin crash with more carbohydrate and more sugar. So that's a very confusing thing for your body. It's just telling you that it wants more sugar. And maybe, I don't know, do you have knowledge on like the impact of, because from what I've heard and read is like the more carbohydrates we eat, the more sort of, I want to say sugar receptors or like carbohydrate receptors, and more stimulation we get and more sort of hunger we get for more carbohydrates.
Yeah, I would say that would make sense. The body is, I think it's again, it comes probably back down to a survival thing. I guess if the body is seeing that the majority of what you're eating is, simple sugars, it's probably assuming that there is not an abundance of other foods. So we should probably try and store fat because maybe we're in a famine or we're going into a famine. So to me, that would make complete sense. I'd say it would have to do as well with the fact that if you are constantly consuming a lot of carbohydrates, you are probably becoming insulin resistant, I would assume, because you need to raise your insulin quite a lot in order to deal with that glucose. So if you are constantly eating glucose containing foods all day long, your insulin is always having to be there present in order to push that glucose into the cells. And so I would say the mixture of becoming insulin resistant also would not be helping. Yeah.
100%. And I like the reference that you made there about how much fruit we may end up eating, back in the day, let's say 1,000 years ago or 10,000 years ago, or maybe 1,000,000 years ago, we'd only get fruit at a certain time of year. So my take on this big argument, in the carnivore world, like, should you have fruit? Should you not have fruit? Like, I think we're capable of dealing with fruit, of course, but not for the whole year, every day. So
Yes.
like maybe for 1 or 2 months, you have an abundance of fruit, which would mimic like the end of summer and the ripening of different fruits and stuff. But then that's about it. The rest of the year, it's pretty barren in terms of like vegetables and fruit.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are certain foods that become available at certain times of the year for a reason. And I think the problem these days, where do we start? But one of the problems these days is that you can get those fruits and vegetables any time of the year that you want. If you're in a westernized country, I couldn't tell you today what is actually in season in Australia right now. And I have heard of people using, a continuous glucose monitor and finding that their glucose will spike a lot more if they are eating something that is not in season in their country, whereas if they go to a country where it is in season, it seems to not affect them so much. I think that is
what's going on
really
there?
interesting.
You got any
Really, really
theories?
interesting. My theory is that your body probably, it would possibly have to do with your genetics as well. I would assume that people that are from, for example, somewhere like Costa Rica might have a genetic ability to handle, say, less animal protein and more of those sweet fruits, maybe. I don't know. Yeah, I think the body, I mean, if we think about it, your body responds in different ways to consuming foods at different times of the day. You know, it's responding to your, you know, to the exposure of blue light, and it's producing neurotransmitters and you know, melatonin, serotonin.
Yeah.
And so I think we are very, very, we are taking in the environment at all times. And I think the body is responding to, where am I at? What time of the year is it? Should we be eating these foods? Maybe this is why we're eating them. You know, I think the
Yeah.
body, we need to give the body more respect for what it's able to understand from our environment.
100%. And I think there's far more. I'm only just scratching the surface of the interplay of light and how that affects the biochemistry in our body. Because I was speaking to, I think her name is Carrie Bennett, and a guy called Ryan Carter, I want to say. And he's at Live Vitae, and you know, they're talking about the because he mentioned that similar thing about eating fruits in different parts of the world will give you a different blood glucose spike. And I think that their theory around that was around the different light spectrum that's there at that time, and you know, the tilt of the earth and everything. And we are far more complex as humans, rather than just boiling things down to even just the hormonal level. Like there's the spectrum of the different spectrums of light, how they hit our eye, how that impacts then the hormones that are released, our circadian rhythm. Like they're boiling things down to the electron level, whereby everything, essentially energy that we get in our body, is essentially how efficient our mitochondria are with electrons. So like when you put it like that, that's when I start to scratch my head and I just go, right, I actually understand nothing.
Yeah, honestly, the further I get into biochemistry, the more I realize that really so many of the concepts that we have grown to believe. I mean, the perfect example is calorie counting. I mean, how that even became a widely used way of, you know, understanding metabolism is beyond me. It's just completely beyond me. There is just so much going on, as you said, at electron level with how the metabolism works, and you cannot say that something like counting calories has really anything to do with how we are able to I mean, I won't say that calories mean absolutely nothing, but that is just a perfect example of it's just the inability of people to understand how a human body works.
It's crazy. But like, I don't know if you've come across some guy called Graham Tomlinson, and then you've got what's his name, something Lane Norton, and
Lane Norton,
and like they just absolutely love ripping into anyone who basically says anything about weight loss is about anything other than calories. And I'm like, I just have to stay out of the whole thing. Maybe Lane Norton is a bit more nuanced, but he loves getting sort of aggravated online and pulling people down. I guess that's just his methodology of getting attention in that, because he's a very reasonable guy on a podcast. But when it's boiled down to that level, I really have to bite my thumbs to not go in on the comment section, because I think it's really damaging, because it can put people in a position where they try to have their whole diet based on, like, you know, a sandwich in the morning, and then pasta for lunch, and then maybe pasta for some form of pasta or salad for dinner. And like, although they might be within a calorie amount that's written a little bit less than what they're burning in the day, so therefore in a caloric deficit, like how hard that's going to be to continue to lose weight loss is just really, really unfair, because it's missing so much of the picture. Yeah,
absolutely. Lane Norton confuses me, because he does have some really interesting concepts, and in fact he's as far as I believe a big fan of Don Layman and his protein research. You know, he's got some good ideas, and he's obviously a smart man, but how anybody can say that about calories and really truly believe that calories is everything, I just think, have you never looked into anything to do with insulin? What about the peptides that we secrete when we're consuming certain foods, how that relates to our hunger, how that relates to leptin? I mean, there is just so much to it. I unfortunately, where people may have some good points, like what's his name? I forgot his name now.
Lane Norton.
Lane Norton. I glaze over as soon as I hear them pushing the calories in, calories out thing. I just glaze over.
Yeah, it's very difficult. It's very difficult to say anything back because, you know, there are plenty of studies out there, because that's ultimately, we don't have to go down this rabbit hole, but ultimately that's what these big companies and the big business want, is for you to reduce it down to just calories in, calories out, because then the problem of why you're not losing weight is your fault. Ultimately it is,
Exactly.
but it's your fault, and you should not stop eating our food. It's not our food that's the problem. It's only how much of it you're eating. Like, you know, rather than all the additives, the shit, the amount of sugar in there, the amount of like crap, seed oils and everything in between. It's just, if you just ate 1 Mars bar less a day, then you'd lose weight.
And, you know, I think that appeals to people too, because it's a way of feeling that you are in control of what occurs, what happens to your body and your weight. And I know for myself, I calorie counted basically my entire adult life up until the last few years. And I saw that as a security blanket at the end of the day, to know that, okay, I'm, you know, even just like within 5 or 6 calories under or above, I'm like, right, I've achieved what I wanted to achieve for the day and I'm in control. Even when I could see that that wasn't working for my body, that still gave me that feeling of control and comfort. And I also think as well, it appeals to people because it allows us to have things in our diet on the daily that we know, we probably deep down know are not great for us. Like even things like protein bars these days. I mean, gone are the days where protein bars were disgusting and tasted like, you know, paper. These days they're delicious, and some of them you can't taste the difference between a Mars bar and a protein bar. And I think people feel like if they fit them within their calorie and macro goals, then why not have it 2, 3 times a day? It's sad. I think it is very sad. Yeah.
And I think it's different for the person who's having those as a small stop, as like a gap filler in a heavy training program, an athlete or an amateur athlete who's got that as just to fill in a gap for an hour where they don't want to go catabolic and they're trying to get from the gym to their, like a job or something. Like, fine, absolutely no problem. That's not going to really hurt you. Like, I'd always choose some cooked steak instead, but like, that's fine. It's not going to hurt you. But if you give that to someone who's barely getting into the gym twice a week, and they're using that as a stopgap in the afternoon to stop their sugar crashing, then there's some serious issues there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the people that I think of the most with this that makes me sad is the overweight type 2 diabetic, you know, person in their 60s that are on a shake diet because they're trying to lose weight and organize their diabetes, and there's just no nutrient density at all, but it's within their calorie allowance for the day, so they're going to be healing their body. And it's like, this is just so wrong. And unfortunately, this is the sort of stuff that we are getting taught in a dietetics course, that is the way to control people and their weight loss. So I just think that's very sad.
It's crazy. Well, it's the money spinner, isn't it? It's like the Weight Watchers stuff. They just want to get you buying their products that fits you within that. I don't know how they do it, like a point system or something, like every 100 calories is a point or something, and you can have 10 points a day. But it's not the best way to lose weight. And there was someone who mentioned the other day that nearly everyone has an abundance of motivation, but very few people have an abundance of clarity. Like clarity around what to do to get the result that you want. That's where people are really lacking, and that's where there's so much confusion out there.
Absolutely. And I think what a lot of people don't understand, and possibly have never even experienced in their life, is the difference between, you know, say you're following a diet like that, Weight Watchers or whatever. There is such a distinct difference between feeling fullness and feeling satiety, feeling that true satiating feeling when you've eaten something that you honestly are in the kitchen, you think, I could not have another bite. I am so satisfied. And that is difficult. Even I think today it is difficult because then you might have chocolate in front of you, and there's always room for chocolate. But I think majority of people in their adult life have never actually experienced satiety. It's all about feeling fullness by having these huge big salads, and yes, there might be some nutrition in them if you're having a little bit of meat and you're having some, you know, some vegetables and all this. But it's like, most people are living every meal of their life like that, and still, you know, their stomach might be out here, but they're still not not feeling any satiety. So I think that's a big thing as well.
Is that like, do you think that's like a biological inbuilt thing that the body is just saying we need to eat more because we don't have enough nutrients? Like keep eating, like you've eaten plenty of volume, but you just haven't got the nutrients. We're going to keep eating until we hit the nutrients.
Absolutely. Yeah. Because I mean, as food passes through the gastrointestinal system, you know, I think people underestimate just how much neural innovation and how the neurotransmitters we're releasing, the peptides that are getting secreted, all of these things are sending signals back to the brain, and then the brain is sending signals back to the gut to either speed things up, slow them down. Are we getting enough of whatever nutrients we need? And the body is looking for some distinct things. It's looking for amino acids because we need amino acids for so many things in the body. So protein. It's looking for nutrients overall. It's looking for all the nutrients that we require. And it's looking for enough energy. Basically, that's it. And there have been some really fascinating studies. I'll quote Dr. Rubenheimer and Simpson in Sydney, actually, have done some really interesting research on looking at how people and animals will continuously eat until they've hit certain targets of their protein. And if you go a little bit further into this, it would make sense as well that I'm trying to think of his name. There's a gentleman in the space that's written a book on it shouldn't be the protein leverage hypothesis that Rubenheimer and Simpson have created. It should be the nutrient density hypothesis. You know, the body is looking for certain things, and interestingly, it will continue to seek out food until those requirements have been met. And I can tell you from my personal experience and the people that I've spoken to in this space, this does seem to occur. If you have a big bowl of, you know, salad and vegetables without any, you know, for example, any worthwhile amino acids, you don't have any of the essential amino acids, you're still you might be sitting out here with your stomach out here, but you're still looking for something. You compare that to somebody who has, and I know for myself, has had, you know, a bit of meat and some organs. You could be eating this small portion, but you feel this genuine sense of I'm done. I'm not looking for anything else. I really don't want anything else. So one thing I always recommend to people, especially those who are dealing with binge eating disorders and things like that, or at least a history of undereating in either calories or undereating in nutrients, is to start off with some organ meats. Really, if you start your meal with some organ meats and then some animal protein, you'd be surprised at how you just don't want to keep eating. It's quite incredible. So
excuse me.
Yeah.
coughing my lungs out over here. I've got a hot chamomile tea.
Oh.
Excuse me. I'm back.
It's an interesting concept, and I think it would make sense for us as a species. We are looking for certain things that allow us to continue to live our day to day, and they are things that our body cannot make on its own. It needs to get it from the food that we are consuming. So it makes sense that if we base our diet around the most dense forms of the nutrients that we require, as well as the amino acids that we require, you are getting not only all the amino acids that you need, all the nutrients you need, and enough energy all in one go. So it makes sense why you don't have to keep eating in order to feel satisfied.
And in terms of organ meat, like, do you see a difference between like grass-fed organ meat or factory-reared cattle organ meat, or like the quality of organ meat? Because I get kind of turned off by just buying like liver in a packet that I think is going to be from like a stressed animal or factory farmed animal. I mean, I'm curious on your take on that.
Yeah, I have seen a couple of studies that have looked at not specifically organ meat, but I assume it would be the same, if not more, to a more degree. But I have seen studies where they've looked at the difference in nutrient density between grass-fed meat and meat that have been finished, you know, on grains, and they can see that as the animal is finished on grains, the levels of certain nutrients will decrease a little bit. So when it comes to nutrient density, you will have more nutrient density in grass-fed meats. hormones and things like that, I think it depends possibly on the animal that you're consuming. I think there are a lot of nuances. I mean, antibiotics and things like that can be stored in the fat tissue. So if I'm going to be eating not well-raised animals, number one, I like to eat well-raised animals where I can for the animal's sake and for the environment's sake. But if I just can't get a hold of it, if I'm looking at it from a nutritional standpoint, I will deliberately choose animals that are ruminant, because they just have a different metabolism, and the product that they give us at the end is less likely to be containing things like antibiotics and things like that. I think what I'm saying, I guess, is that monogastric animals do tend to contain more of the antibiotics and hormones and things in their fat. I have seen a lot. I mean, I haven't researched it a great amount, but I have seen people like Saladino talking about the fact that monogastric animals will contain more polyunsaturated fats. I'm not sure about that yet, but I feel like if there's only the choice between normal meat or grass-fed meat, I like to obviously go grass-fed for the animal's sake and the environment's sake. But if there is no other choice, I like to choose ruminant meat over the others. And if there is absolutely no other choice, I think eating meat over eating other crap is always going to be better. And when it comes to organ meats, they are the most dense form of nutrients that you can get. So whether it is grass-fed or not, I think you're better off eating the organ meats. Again, I think I guess if I had the choice, I like to get my my poultry livers and things like that from ideally a well-raised animal, including eggs and things like that as well. But as long as I'm eating organ meats, I'm pretty happy.
100%. Good stuff. Good to know. And in terms of, you mentioned antibiotics there in animals, and I know that you posted on your social media about you had a kind of a run-in with a parasite and you weren't feeling too good for a while and you had to take a course of antibiotics. I wonder if you could tell us about, I mean, there's two schools of thoughts with antibiotics. One is that we need, like, antibiotics are unnecessary and we can get all this stuff from nature. We can use like garlic and ginger and these other sort of naturally antimicrobial stuff. And then there's other people who say that's crazy because we invented antibiotics to save us from infections and everything. So we do maybe need, unfortunately, sometimes where we take antibiotics, but from what I've seen and heard, they are very damaging to our digestive system and how we process this stuff. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about antibiotics, how they impact the body and how maybe we recover from them.
Yeah, look, when it comes to antibiotics, I wouldn't call myself I don't know as much as I'd like to know about antibiotics, but from my small amount of looking into it, and the way I see antibiotics is kind of sort of a little bit like chemo. Really, it's like putting something in your body that will ideally annihilate whatever it is in there that is not supposed to be there. But at the same time, you're kind of like nuking your entire system. You're basically just trying to get rid of whatever it is, but it's not selective. It's probably going to kill off everything. And so I think it should depend on the choice between taking antibiotics or not should depend on the situation. So for myself, ideally, I always like to go for a natural way of handling things. And in fact, in this situation, I deliberately left it as long as I did because I was convinced that my body was going to sort it out on its own. But just as a bit of a backstory, I was sick about 2 months ago, really, really sick with some kind of gastro thing. And then I seemed to get over it. I went back to normal, but then I kept getting intermittent, just random diarrhea. Didn't worry too much about it. I thought it was other causes. Maybe I was eating something. And then again, I got sick about 6 weeks ago, really, really sick. And ever since then, I just have not been able to hold on to anything. It's all just coming straight out. So at that point, I had, as I said, I'd been trying to just hope that my body would sort it out on its own. I'd been taking some gut bacteria, trying to repopulate, but nothing was helping. And I was starting to really waste away. I was losing weight. I was feeling extremely dry. And I was noticing as well that I was losing a lot of lipids. You know, so I was starting to be concerned about my hormones and things like that. So at this point, I just decided that, you know, it's been going on long enough. I just need to really get rid of whatever it is. And because I'd done a stool sample as well, and it had come back with a parasite, my doctor said to me, look, really with this sort of one, you kind of need to go on the antibiotics. And because I'd just had enough by then, I was getting concerned, as I said. So I decided to. But I think for most people, if you are, you would ideally try to not go on antibiotics. But I think it's exciting to know that you can work your way back up after taking antibiotic. It's not the end of the world. You can definitely work your way back up. I'm not there yet. It's been about a week since I finished them, and I can see that things are not where I want them to be, and probably won't be for quite a few months. But I think if I'm targeted about it, what excites me is that I know for a fact that I was experiencing so many gut issues prior to starting an animal-based diet for my entire life. I never had a normal bowel movement in my entire life until I got to about the age of 30. So, and I managed to heal all that. So I think there is hope. You just have to know what to do.
And what's your sort of plan going forward with this stuff? Because I know you mentioned glutamine, you mentioned some other different tools that you would use to try and glycine. So what's the thought process behind those?
Yeah, look, I mean, I've seen some studies where they've shown to be quite good at regenerating the mucosal layer. And as I said, with antibiotics, unfortunately, they are like nuking the system, and it can cause quite a lot of damage to the, you know, to the cell wall. I think, again, what you, I guess, have to weigh up in your mind is, in my particular situation, when I found out that there was a parasite in there, and as I said, I was starting to lose a lot of my, I could see I was losing a lot of my nutrients. I could see that this thing, I don't know how long it's been in there for, but there was probably a lot of bowel inflammation, which would, what was my point there? Sorry, I've lost my train of thought.
the use of glycine and glutamine.
Yes.
and
Exactly. So my reasoning behind doing that is because I could see that there was probably a lot of inflammation in the wall of my gastrointestinal system, and so by trying to regenerate the mucosal layer, that will ideally help me to create that barrier that we all need. And then by adding in the specific probiotics I've been using, they will hopefully help to, you know, repopulate a little bit. But I think it really comes mainly down to time, giving your body time to regenerate its tissue, but also by supplying the body with a diet that is anti-inflammatory and is, you know, going to be producing ketones and things like that. I think that's probably the best thing I can do. There's nothing too fancy going on with my protocol. It's just going to be the probiotics, and an animal-based diet, being a little bit careful of plant toxins for the time being, because they can be pro-inflammatory, and the glycine and the glutamine, to help regenerate that layer, that barrier, and then just giving it time.
Yeah, it's interesting. Good. I've had similar run-ins with antibiotics and stuff out here, because I'm in Mexico, and like this is like parasite territory out here. Like you sort of like, I don't know, I tend not to even eat out very much anymore, because, and like the ice is often a big vector for parasites. Somehow we like the way the ice is stored, they stack all these ice bags on top of each other, and then they'll chuck the ice bags on the floor, and then, you know, so they're in the restaurant, and they'll put the ice bags back in the freezer, and then obviously each ice bag is then on top of each other with whatever's been on the floor, and they're taking the ice out of there with their hands and putting it in the drinks and stuff. So it's just like, if you're gonna, like, you get it from the drink, and it's super hot out here as well, so you want ice in your drink. But, you know, I tried to avoid that, but I've had a couple of stomach parasites, and the only way to get rid of them is through antibiotic use. That's the postulated way by the doctors. So there are some other sort of like tinctures and remedies, like the one called black walnut tincture, but I tried that, and that absolutely ripped into my gut as well. I mean, that was like, because it's just as much of an antibiotic, you know, as the antibiotics themselves. You're putting it in to kill you're disrupting the parasite in its life cycle. So it's got like full maturation, eggs hatching, larvae to full maturation. but these different tinctures might only disrupt them in like the egg phase. So it might leave behind the larvae and the parents. So you have to keep hitting it at different intervals. And obviously, once you keep doing that, if you don't keep repopulating with either fermented food or probiotics or any of this stuff, then your stomach's in stitches. But I've only learned that since being out here in Mexico, and like it's just it's just par for the course out here. So don't know, it's very difficult. And I think I was reading online the other day that nearly half of it's a stat, so sometimes I trust them, sometimes I don't, but nearly half of the US population has parasites that they're undiagnosed.
I would believe that. I think you know, I mean, we live in an age where we're so lucky because we have these sort of things available to us that are, I mean, antibiotics have saved lives. Really, we are very lucky. I think the catch for us these days is trying to trying to find that happy medium between what have we evolved to do and thrive on as human beings, and that tends to be, from what I can understand, a much more natural diet where you're feeding off the land. But do we want to live off the land completely? No. I mean, if you compare hunter-gatherer tribes, although these people tend to live longer, it's that they do have people dying from diseases that we, of course, can survive from because we have antibiotics. So I think finding that happy medium, and women have to give birth behind a tree, and of course they would probably lose a lot of infants to infections and things like that. Antibiotics, I think, are one of those ones where it depends on the situation. It depends on your personal preference. I am kind of a believer in, if you've been dealing with something like this for a long time, which I had, and it was just going on and on and on. I had tried a few things, they weren't working. So I think, you know what, just smash out a course and then work on rebuilding. And as I said, I mean, I had hope of rebuilding because I had so many years of such a terrible gut health, and I could see that I had managed to heal that. So I think what's exciting about the human body is that we are constantly creating new cells, new proteins. So if you put if you give your body all the ingredients it needs in order to renew itself, and also having periods in your day or week or whatever where you are having times that the body can rid itself of old things, old cells, old protein, autophagy, you are able to allow your body the opportunity to renew itself. So I think that's exciting too.
Yeah, I totally agree. In terms of, we mentioned before the show that I'd seen on your profile that you mentioned bioenergetics. I'm curious, what is bioenergetics?
Bioenergetics is how we take fuels that we consume and how we turn them into energy. So it's everything to do with the mitochondria, basically. They're just the most incredible organelle. The number of things that they do is just fascinating. And I think it interests me because I think if you can maximize the health of your mitochondria, you'll basically live an extremely healthy and long life. It all comes down to the mitochondria.
And how would one optimize the health of the mitochondria? Or is that too big a question?
There's a lot of things you can do. I think providing mitochondria, I'll give you a blanket answer. I think providing the mitochondria with a requirement to upregulate themselves and increase in abundance and their capacity to work, you're going to be in better health. So for example, some little stresses here and there, not constant chronic stress, but little stresses here and there that will make the body go, oh my gosh, I need more mitochondria so that I can process that, like exercise, like cold exposure, even heat exposure, and things like, for example, being in ketosis in times of your life as well, making the body use fat over glucose is very, very good for mitochondria too, because we need mitochondria to burn fat. So the more you're trying to burn fat, the more your body will go up. We need more mitochondria to be able to do this. So we'll upregulate them. So that would be my blanket answer.
I've heard theories as well that many cancers are due to mitochondrial dysfunction, and the more you can take away or the more that you can enable your mitochondria to function, the less likely you are to get any cancers.
Yeah, well, I guess if you are, I mean, I won't say that I know much about that. I've certainly heard the same thing as well. My understanding of that would probably be, it could be to do with the ability for our body to break down and handle reactive oxygen species and byproducts of metabolism. And if you aren't able to, I mean, all of that really is occurring in the mitochondria. So if you are having issues with that process, I would assume that that would lead to some dysfunctions. And the interesting thing about cancers, though, is that there are some that, there are many cancers, most of the main ones that thrive on, for example, glucose. And this is why something like a ketogenic diet can be useful for a lot of cancers, because you're basically depriving the cancer's ability to use energy, and so therefore it can't proliferate. The scary thing, though, about cancers is that a lot of cancers can thrive in an abundance of any macronutrient. So if you have an overabundance of anything and the cells are able to use that as energy, then you can basically continue the growth of the cancers. So
even like an overabundance of fat, even if you're in ketosis, but you're over an abundance of fats.
Exactly. So I can't list off the cancers that do that, but I have heard that can occur. And so that's where I think for people that have cancers, things like fasting can be really, really useful. I guess then there's the way up between people that are fighting cancers often have difficulty eating. And so this can be tricky because they might be losing a lot of weight. But at the same time, an overabundance, I think, of anything in an anabolic state like cancer can be a real issue. So giving your body time to be in catabolism is something that I personally would do if I was suffering with cancer. But I won't say that I know enough about cancer to really talk that much on it.
What's your so you're obviously alluding to like intermittent fasting and stuff there.
Yeah.
What's the time scales do you think is beneficial for people to have for fasting? We're not talking about cancer anymore, don't worry.
Okay, so it depends on your goal. I think if you are somebody like myself who wants to stay as fit and as young as I can, and when I say as young as I can, I think having muscle mass is the best way to stay young. I think those that have the most muscle mass within reason tend to be able to live longer, healthier lives because they can stay active, right? So for me personally, I want to maximize the time that I am in an anabolic growth state. And so I think doing days and days worth of fasting wouldn't be ideal for me. It sort of takes, I mean, if you're wanting to build any tissue like muscle, it's very, very intensive for the body to not only build muscle, but just keep it on the body. It's very calorie intensive. And this is why somebody who has a lot of muscle will tend to stay quite lean, really, because it's very metabolic having muscle. So for me, so in other words, if you are not consistently fueling that muscle and trying to keep it there, you will start to become catabolic and break it down pretty quickly within hours, really. So finding that happy medium between being anabolic enough through the day and then also having periods of being catabolic is very, very healthy, but it's hard to find that balance. I think somewhere between 2 to 3 meals is pretty ideal for most people who want enough muscle but are wanting to have that autophagy as well. Personally, I stick to around 16 to 18 hours fasted. I like to do TRE, so time restricted eating, as opposed to intermittent fasting. That gives me that happy balance between being in a state where I have some catabolism, I'm able to reset insulin, blah, 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 but I'm also able to still build and maintain muscle as well. If you are in a health state, for example, like you were dealing with cancer or you're really dealing with some sort of severe autoimmune condition, doing days worth of fasting could be good. But I think my only problem is that with it is muscle loss.
Yeah. And it's the funny thing, like, once you get past the initial feeling of like hunger, or you think it's hunger, but it's not actually hunger. It's just oftentimes it's just your stomach actually retracting back to its natural state. And a lot of people mistake that for hunger. So once you get past that, it's amazing how clear and how much you actually don't need to eat so regularly. Well, that's what I found fascinating is we eat like, some people eat 3, 4, 5 times a day, grazing or snacking. And sometimes I either eat twice a day or 3 times a day, depending on how much I'm training. And it's fascinating how when you remove some of those and you get over the psychological barrier, because most of it's psychological. Like you get home from work and you think, oh, nice, I'm going to eat now. Or you wake up in the morning and you think, perfect, time for breakfast. Once you get over those barriers, then you realize, hang on, I'm actually not that hungry.
Yeah. I'll tell you something on that and people might find me a little bit weird and extreme, but I think this is something I use daily to figure out, truly, am I hungry or am I just wanting something? Am I just bored? Am I just craving something? I do the meat test. Like I always try to be organized enough that when I make my meat, I always have a little bit left over that's just cold that I can have in the fridge. And I usually have that in the form of mince. And I will say to myself, once I've finished a meal or when I'm thinking that I'm hungry, I'll go to the fridge and I'll say, could I eat cold mince right now? If I can, I'm truly hungry. My body is actually hungry. But if I don't, then I'm probably just craving something. And I think what I will say is that I think if you are getting hunger pains and they are persisting, they're not going away, then you probably are hungry and maybe your body is seeking something out. But I think if you get that little intermittent hunger pain and you're like, am I hungry? And then you get distracted and then you move on. I think that's just the body transitioning from, okay, well, I've had a little bit of glucose. Now I'm going to tap into my fat. So I think it's important in order to be able to experience that and to be able to fast between meals, you really need to be metabolically well and to have the capacity to tap into your own body fat.
Yeah, 100%. Well, that's the thing. Most people haven't grooved that system and can't make that transition to ketosis, because the first time when you go either fasting and you're trying to do a fast to get into ketosis, that's like, if you haven't grooved that channel, that could take you days to actually get into ketosis. So, that's going to be a struggle unless you've got someone there leading you there and saying, look, it's natural to feel like this. Then it's going to be very hard to get past that hunger barrier, or the brain fog at least.
And I think as well, it's difficult because everybody is when they're feeling a certain way, if it's aside from hunger, if it's brain fog or low energy or just whatever it is, I think it's hard to figure out, is it that I'm actually seeking some sort of a food source, or is it that I'm actually just requiring maybe some electrolytes or something? Sometimes your body is looking for different things, and it's not just that it needs glucose or that it needs fat. And I guess it takes a lot of time to get more in touch with your body, and it will happen, but it does take time to figure out, okay, is it food I'm seeking or is it something else that I'm seeking? And I think what's so interesting is that, as I said, when you are eating nutrient dense foods, I remember looking at this at the start and thinking, how could I possibly feel satisfaction from eating smaller meals or only twice a day, because I was used to eating 6 times a day and these big massive vegetable salads and things like that. And when you compare a piece of steak that's, say, this big to a big massive bowl, you think, God, that's not going to fill me up. But people underestimate nutrient density. As we were talking about before, the body is looking for certain things, and once it's got those things, it's kind of happy. It's happy to move on. And then if you have some body fat on your body that's able to be accessed throughout the day, your body's like, yeah, sweet, I'm good to go. I think there's a big difference between having access to that fuel and not having access. And I mean, you can be heavily overweight but not be able to access that body fat, and of course you're going to be hungry then because your body's run out of food.
100%. Nikki, it's been fascinating talking to you. If anyone wants to find out more about you or see those incredible videos I'm talking about, where can they find you online?
Well, so far I'm just on Instagram. I have just recently, I'm under bio.chem.nikki, and but I am in the process of setting up a website, because recently I decided that my dietetics course wasn't giving me enough of ketogenic information. So I went and did a keto certification course as well. So I'll be setting up a website, and I'll be taking on clients soon if anybody's interested. So I'll keep you guys posted on Instagram about that when that's set up. But I am a massive technophobe. I'm terrible at technology. So if anybody has any tips on how to set up a website and make it look good, get in contact with me. But I'm really only on Instagram.
There are going to be hundreds of people getting in touch with you now who are trying to shark business to you.
Oh, it's true. Well, thank you so much for having me. It's so fun talking about these sort of topics with like-minded people. I love it.
It's great. I really appreciate you taking the time. Thanks for coming on.